Okay, welcome to the Northeast Engineers HVAC Podcast. Today we're going to be providing updates on the R410A transition to A2L refrigerants, including the history, important benchmarks, properties of the A2L replacements, and the ASHRAE 34 A2L classifications. This special New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania PDH approved presentation is brought to you by Klima New York, Klima New Jersey, EBS HVAC, ETS, Energy Transfer Solutions, Insight Partners, and Hobbs and Associates. This presentation qualifies for PDH credits in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, Tennessee, Maryland, Alabama, Delaware, Mississippi, West Virginia, Arkansas, and many other states. Those are just the ones we know about, so please check with your local authorities there when it comes to PDH certifications. So for PDH certificates today, you can email me at tmormino@insightUSA.com. If you've already registered, we've got your email. We'll share more about that later. So I'm Tony Mormino with Insight Partners, your host today, and I'm joined by Kevin Quillinan, who's the Principal and Technical Sales Engineer with Klima, New Jersey. So how are you today, Kevin?
Good. Glad to be here. Excited to have this media, to have some PDH credits out there for the industry and educate everyone. It's cool to participate in this.
I know. I'm so super excited. So this is the first one we've done. We're calling it the Northeast Engineers HVAC Podcast, which is kind of a play on the current Engineers HVAC Podcast. We're calling it the Northeast version because this is the first time we've actually got PDH approved presentations in New York and New Jersey, which is a little stricter than the rest of the country on PDHs, but that's okay. So this is one of, I think we've got 4 now approved. Is that right, Kevin?
Yes. Yeah. We like to make everything a little more difficult up here. So I'm glad we were able to get 4 through.
That's awesome. Yeah. So super excited to be here. We hope that if you're joining us, you'll, give us a comment. Let us know where you're from. We'd love to give you a shout out on LinkedIn here. I see Sean behind me coming in. Good morning, Sean. Hey, you're late. What's going on? He didn't know he was going to be live on LinkedIn.
Yeah, exactly.
That's for sure. He's like, what are these guys doing? That's what happens when you get merged with the marketing guy. You got to watch the camera on live all the time. So
I don't know if I'd be walking by your office that often.
Oh, man. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Excuse me for a minute, Kevin. How is it going in New Jersey? You talk about that. I'm going to share this on my LinkedIn feed as well because I want to make sure we get the word out here. So,
yeah, it's good here in New Jersey. The weather's it's a humid day out there.
Greetings from Orlando, Marson. Yeah, Joe from Colorado Springs. Joe, welcome, and Matt, welcome. Gilbert from New York City.
New York City. There we go. Looks like we have someone from the UK on here. I apologize ahead of time for our accents.
Yeah, exactly. Shout out to the UK fella or lady. I'm sorry, I must have missed you. It's coming in real quick here. Wellingborough, UK. Wellingborough. Wow. Hey man, we're worldwide today. We're worldwide internationally known, as there used to be a song that said that. Chris, welcome from North Carolina. Jason from Cincy, Ohio. Watching from Atlanta. Awesome. Yeah, thank you all for joining us. This is great. We could just do this for the hour. This is more fun than learning about refrigerants, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll just sit here and say where everyone's from.
It looks like you got a guy next to your office there, Ethan. He might cause you some trouble.
Yeah, Ethan, you're not allowed to take phone calls. You talk too loud on the phone, so I need you to, even though the door is shut.
That's right. We got someone from Canada here. Welcome. And Wayne, welcome. Yeah, so we're going to get started here again. If you registered on LinkedIn, we have your email, but please email me in a minute. We'll have Heather put up the email address. You could send me an email direct and I'll send you the hey, there we go. Excuse me. PDH certificate back. So Ashley, Austin, awesome. We're going to get started here in just a second. So please engage, ask questions. If we can answer them, we'd love to. Might not know everything you need to know, but we'll do the best we can. So awesome. Thank you, Kevin, for being here. This is great.
Oh, of course.
All right, let's get this thing rolling. Okay, so let's see here. Give me just a second. I got to get my screens ready here. And we're going to officially start so this is kind of like a live PDH/podcast all wrapped in one. So please ask questions. That would be great. So welcome to the Northeast Engineers HVAC Podcast. And today we will be providing an update on the Fortinet transition to A2L refrigerants, including the history, important benchmarks, properties of the A2L replacements, and the ASHRAE 34 A2L classification. This special New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania PDH approved presentation is brought to you by Klima New York, Klima New Jersey, EBS HVAC, Energy Transfer Solutions, Insight Partners, and Hobbs & Associates. This presentation qualifies for PDH credits in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, Tennessee, Maryland, Alabama, Delaware, Mississippi, West Virginia, Arkansas, and many other states. I've got to find a better way to announce all that. It sounds crazy, but this one's almost everywhere is approved. So just check. The uniqueness of this one is it's approved in New York and New Jersey, which is a little more stringent on the PDHs, but we still love you guys. It's all right. It's all right. We're here. Okay. So for the PDH certificates, please email me at tmormino@insightUSA.com. Heather can put up that email address. If you're watching this on LinkedIn and you pre-register, we have your email. We will email you the PDH certificate and a link to this presentation. But as you know, a lot of those go to spam. So just email me is the surest way to get that. So, all right. So now enough of that. And we'll go ahead and start the official presentation here. So yeah. So again, please, hey, Jenna from Hobbs, welcome. Please put your comments in the chat. If you have information that could be useful to the HVAC community, or if you have questions for us, we're glad to ask whatever we can. So the title of this is the R410A phase down, transition to low GWP refrigerants. Really, it's a transition to low GWP refrigerants. Okay, we say it's an R410A phase down, which is true, but the whole purpose of what's going on today is try to get rid of to lower the GWP count on the refrigerants. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So let me get my slides good over here. Okay, so if you're like me and you Google A2Ls and transitions and deadlines and the EPA and all this stuff, it's extremely confusing. Okay, so we hope that, what we did is we got together with a lot of the industry experts that we know, and we kind of culled this information. And hopefully when you leave here, you'll have a better understanding about what's happening, why it's happening, and what's coming up next. So if you're confused, you are not alone. Let me tell you, if it wasn't for the experts, I would be confused too. So anyway, thank you again for joining us. We really do appreciate it. Again, this is our first approved PDH event in New York and New Jersey. So we're super excited about this. We have 3 more approved, and we're getting them approved probably one a month. So we're just going to continue to do this, and we hope that you will continue to watch it. So thank you. Okay, so who are these guys? So I'm Tony Mormino. I'm with a HVAC rep firm called Insight Partners, and I'm in Asheville, North Carolina. There's a little snapshot of my city, and this Kevin guy is somewhere up in New Jersey. Where is that? Like up north or something?
No, actually, you got that map perfect. I'm in Red Bank, New Jersey, which is right on the tip, the north point of the Jersey Shore. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. Kevin Quillinan here with Klima New Jersey. One of the principals and technical sales engineers here for the office, and really excited to be here. Excited to be able to put on this presentation with you.
Yeah, man, that's great. And you got a nice YouTube video out there too. I'll give you a shout out to that, so you can go watch. Kevin's a big YouTube star, and I see that Jersey City. I at one point between careers, my wife and I, and then the family traveled in an RV for like a year. We sold everything and we moved in an RV and we traveled around the country. Jersey City is one of the cities we went to.
Yeah.
Don't make a wrong turn in New Jersey pulling a 40-foot fifth wheel. I learned that the long way. It was like I turned down one street. It was like going back in time with in the 20s, like the wires were real low, and it was a mess.
Yeah.
And
well, even when you get out of Jersey City, though, we don't make our lefts easy either. You have to go right to go left. So
is that right?
We'll confuse you wherever you go. Don't worry about it.
Awesome. I love it. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover today. Sorry about that. It was just a little bit of an aside there. But so we're going to talk a little bit about the history. How did we get to where we are? The transition deadlines, which are probably the most important thing. the properties of the viable replacements, which are R32 and 454B, and the mildly flammable aspect of this, which is really, if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for the A2L classification, probably wouldn't be that big of a deal, but that changes a lot of things in terms of building codes, et cetera. So a little bit of the history, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I started back in 97, which is just when we were transitioning from CFCs to HCFCs. And then we transitioned from HCFCs to HFCs. So if you look at that, you kind of see chlorofluorocarbons to hydrochlorofluorocarbons to hydrofluorocarbons. So what we were doing is we were eliminating the refrigerants that had chlorine in them. And the reason we were doing that is because chlorine attacks the ozone. And the whole movement back then was about the ozone layer. It really wasn't focused on global warming. Now, if you look at the bottom there, it's talking about zero ODP, ozone depletion, and then low GWP. So now the purpose of this is to show kind of a little bit of the history from 12 to 22. I still have a 22 machine on my home, actually, which I'm about to replace with 410A. It was there when I bought it. And then now we're going from 410A to lower GWP refrigerants, which is what we're talking about here. So just a little bit of history. Ozone is an O3 molecule. It's good. It keeps out all the bad stuff. Chlorine attacks ozone. It attacks O3 and it causes it to disintegrate. There used to be something called hairspray, which a lot of people used in the 80s, which I think caused a lot of that. We had this big hole in the ozone. Apparently, the ozone layer has made a comeback. There's not really a big concern about that anymore. So global warming is a little bit different. So we've got this blanket of atmosphere around us, which is good. It consists mostly of oxygen, nitrogen, a little bit of argon, a little bit of CO2, and it helps trap in the heat, which is good. If you got too much of this stuff in the air, the heat can't get out. It gets hot, and yada yada yada. That's the deal. So GWP. A lot of people don't know this is a. Someone commented Aquanet. GWP is the GWP number associated with refrigerant is a multiple of CO2. So CO2 is the baseline, or CO2 is 1 GWP. So 700 GWP, 700 times more the global warming potential. It's actually a lot more complicated than that. Someone explained it to me, like all the variables that go into it. It's extremely confusing. Anyway, so that's just a basic of that. Fun fact, CO2 concentration is approximately 0.04% in the atmosphere. So that's a little bit about global warming. So this slide just basically kind of summarized what we're talking about. We're going from, I'm not going to go through all these. You can Google them to your heart's content. Get very confused too, but it basically started with the Montreal Protocol, which again was in the beginning. This was all started to eliminate the chlorine. It was all about the ozone layer, right? So the first two protocols there, or rules, Montreal Protocol and then the SNAP rules, were about the ozone. Then the Montreal Kigali Amendment was when this all started to focus on the global warming. Okay. What happened is in 2016, the US said no thanks to the Kigali Amendment. The world went on to do their thing. And some states in the United States said, wait a second, we want to be part of this. We're going to make our own rules. Okay. So I've heard this referred to as the Climate Alliance states. So some states have different rules now than the federal rules. And that's why I'm bringing this point up. And I think New York's one of those states, New Jersey.
Yeah. A lot of the Northeast is. And, we've already been seeing some changes in equipment out there because of this up here in the Northeast.
Yeah, I'm sure. Because you guys have, we'll talk about that in a minute, but you all have different rules than the others in terms of chillers. But everybody's going to catch up and be on the same schedule. So What happened is the manufacturers got together, went to Congress, said, hey, y'all got to do something. We say y'all down here. You might say yous guys up there. I'm not really sure. Or you
exactly.
guys.
Spot on.
But I am from Buffalo, but that was a long time ago. But so they went to Congress and said, look, you got to do something to help us. We've got all these different deadlines, all these different rules, yada, yada, yada. So that's when Congress passed the AIM Act. And I don't know if it just had to do with the manufacturers, but they were part of the crew going up there. So the AIM Act is the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act. So that's what AIM stands for. What this did is it gave the EPA the clearance to make rules, or the authorization to make rules regarding high GWP refrigerants. So then the EPA went to work and put together the deadlines and the rules we have today. So what the EPA did is they went and looked at California, kind of saw what they were doing from a schedule standpoint, from a GWP standpoint, because they had already done a lot of work on this, and they modeled it after that. So I'm not going to go through all that because we're going to talk about this here in a minute. So first important slide, if you're watching and want to take a snapshot of this, this is the milestones for, probably the most important milestone we have is the manufacturing of the equipment, the shipping of the equipment. Okay. So the manufacturing deadlines are as follows. There's a national transition on 1/1/25, which is, roughly 6 months from now. Chillers and air conditioning systems other than VRF cannot ship with a GWP refrigerant over 700. Okay, so all AC equipment other than VRF 1/1/25 cannot ship. On 1/1/26, that is the national transition for VRF. So VRF gets an extra year. I'm not really sure why that is. I'm assuming it's because of the complexity of changing the refrigerant in a VRF system, but that's just the Tony version of that. I really don't know.
I agree with that. I think just with everything that goes into the systems and how much installation considerations there are with VRF, they're just trying to give the industry a little more time on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now your state, Kevin, if you see this there's a smaller text in there which says chillers 1/1/24 GWP less than 750 in the Climate Alliance states. So in states like New Jersey and New York, you cannot ship a chiller this year with 410A or a high GWP refrigerant. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Since January 1st this year, we haven't been able to. We've even run into it in some instances with stock equipment. We have to communicate with the manufacturers to make sure that the chiller that is in stock was produced last year as opposed to this year. So it's all about communicating and understanding kind of where you're at with everything.
Good. That's good to know. So this slide here is just Maryland was the last place I gave this presentation at an ASHRAE group there. I was online. I wasn't there in person, but this is a copy of their Department of Environment rules in terms of equipment shipping with 410A. So they have the same, as we just talked about, it's the same kind of deal. So the reason I bring this up is if you're an engineer or even a contractor or whatever, and you're doing work in all kinds of states, just be careful because you can't ship a 410A chiller into some states. You can here in North Carolina, you can't in New York. You get the idea. So just be super careful with that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is sell-through periods for equipment. So this has to do with what's called remnant inventory in our business. So distributors or rep firms like ours and Kevin's have warehouses sometimes full of equipment. Okay, and the deadlines for installing that equipment are laid out in the EPA's final rule because a lot of it has 410A in it, right? So they don't want equipment being installed with 410A 10 years from now. They want us to get through it and use it. So originally, and this pertains only to unitary equipment. So everything 25 tons and below, you now get more time to install it than before. So the deadlines are as follows. So it's 1/1/26. If you have a unitary split system, it has to be installed by that date, and you get to 1/1/28 for a packaged unit. So, for example, if you've got a 10-ton package unit with 410A, you've got a couple of years before you have to install that piece of equipment. So, make sense? All right. So that's a little bit about shipping equipment from the manufacturer, and then we talked about sell-through dates for remnant equipment that's already shipped. Now let's talk about the actual phase down of the refrigerant production. Okay, so we've actually been in an R410A production phase down since 2022. Okay, so it's a 10% reduction. I think the baseline is whatever was manufactured in 2022. That's where they start with the percent reduction. So the next, we're in the second part of that phase down, which is a 40% reduction, an additional 40% to the baseline. So the next benchmark for that is 2029, which will be another 70%. So you can see the kind of the phase down in manufacturing of the refrigerant. It's a little bit scary because we're still shipping 410A gear. I mean, we'll be shipping it till end of December, like manufacturers will. So, there's going to be some price increases in 410A. There already has been, and that's going to, continue. We'll be okay. I've been doing this for 25 years in this industry, and I've been through many of these transitions, and it always works out fine. But there will be an overlap there, so be careful of that.
Yeah, and it is nice that reduction down to 70% isn't until 2029 when we have, some time to work through the transitions of everything.
Yeah, and are you seeing, Kevin, people gearing up to do more recycling?
I do. Yeah. I think a lot of people that, kind of lived through the R22 phase down, right? Because we have a lot of people in the industry that still remember that. And, I'm sure we'll talk about that as far as, pressures and everything like that, because that was a big consideration with that. But I think, the same people that lived through that are kind of gearing themselves up for that to start to recover and, properly reuse.
Yeah, good stuff. So Kevin had a good question here. Kevin McDonald. How is the installation defined for VRF systems and related to the January 1, the 2026 deadline? So I'm not sure if that is, let me think about that. So the sell-through date, if you have a VRF system in your warehouse and it's not unitary, it has to be installed by 1/1/26 is my understanding of it. Or yes, I think that is true. So, but when you ship it in 1/1/26, when does it have to be installed by? That's a good question. I don't really know the answer to that. I'll have to find out.
Yeah, because I don't think that would fall under the unitary sell-through period.
No.
So I don't. Yeah. I haven't heard it. It's possible that it may not be established exactly at this point, just because there are some considerations being worked through with VRF still.
That's a great question, Kevin. We'll look into that, and Heather, if you can make a note of that, we'll look into that for sure. Yeah, because 1/1/26 is the shipping deadline. How long do you get when you get it to when you can install it? I'm sure there's something in this. So there's a good segue into this document, which is the EPA's Technology Transition Rule document. There's if you want to look this up, this has all the current details. This was, I think, updated in 2023, sometime this year. So it's going to be updated again soon, I'm sure. But you can go and download this PDF. We'll put the link in the chat. Courtney, you can drop that in the chat here. And if you're listening to this in the future, we'll put it in the show notes so you can go to. But you can go in here and it has all the details in terms of the regulations here. So here's a snapshot of the actual inside of this PDF. So you'll see here, one of the things I wanted to point out here is you'll see we're not the only industry that uses refrigerants, right? You've got a lot of freezers in here. You've got display cases, retail food refrigeration. You'll see a lot of them have a GWP limit of 300. Some of them have a GWP limit of 150. And when I give this presentation, people often ask, well, why doesn't the EPA just make our industry 300 or 150? And the answer is we can't. We don't have a viable option for that. Some of these display cases use CO2, some of them use propane. So it's a different type of refrigerant. They have a low natural GWP to those refrigerants. So that's why you'll see that when you look up this document. So, all right. So when we put all that together, this is another one of those slides. If you want to keep the, deadlines in your head, take a picture of this and you can have that in your back pocket. So just to recap, equipment manufacturing deadlines, national transition 1/1/25 for everything except VRF. And then we've got the national transition of VRF 1/1/26. And then the GWP production, it's 40% right now, which is actually 50% from the baseline, but an additional 40, and then 70% on 2029. Thank you, Courtney, for sharing the information there. Let's see here. We got a couple questions. Let's see if we know the answer to any of these. How do the updated refrigerant changes affect energy efficiency ratings of equipment? We'll talk about that in a minute. It really doesn't affect it a whole lot. Most of the manufacturers I talk to say it's really not changed it much at all.
Yeah.
What do you think, Kevin? You heard anything about that?
Yeah, I agree. The only thing I've seen are slight efficiency changes in the refrigerants themselves, but I feel like manufacturers still have efficiency targets they're aiming for. So even if there is an inefficiency in refrigerants, they're accounting for that in, kind of different control methods of equipment to overall have, the same efficiencies that are needed or expected.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. So Kevin McDonald came back as a clarification. I'm thinking of large multi-phase buildings also seems unenforceable. Yeah, I'm not sure. And there's another question here: who this enforces this? I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. I'm sure there's some local code authority that will enforce it, but I don't know the answer to that, to be honest, because we're kind of learning as we go, and we haven't even gotten into it yet.
Yeah, it's
that's one of the things I've learned. Every time I do this presentation, I got to go back and check with everybody. Hey, are they still right? Do we know? And most of the answers I get is we just don't know, which is a little scary.
I would think because of the inability to drop in refrigerants like R32, there's going to probably be model numbers that they'll check for, because those model numbers are going to be strictly using R32 or A2L refrigerants. So that would be my assumption, but it's going to take time for that to show itself.
Got it. Okay, let's go on to, we got some more questions here, but I think they'll be better answered on the next couple slides. But I'll go ahead and read them here in a minute too. Okay, so you're an HVAC manufacturer and you can't use 410A, and that's your go-to refrigerant. What do you do? Okay, so this next part talks about the two viable alternatives and their efficiencies, GWPs, ODPs, et cetera. So what you see here is what you see as a refrigerant: 410A, R22, 407C, R32, yada, yada, yada. The global warming potential, which is in the middle there. Oops, let me pull up my pen here so I can write on this here. So the GWP and then the ODP. So we'll start with the ODP, ozone depletion. We've already kind of took care of that in the refrigerant, so that's 0 or close to 0. You can see that now we have a 700 GWP limit. Well, that eliminates, any of these refrigerants as options. We don't see 407C very much anymore. R22, that's been out of new equipment for a long time. And then 410A. So 410A is 2088. Someone asked this question earlier: how does it relate? So 2088 GWP. So the two viable alternates we have in the HVAC industry for package units and split systems is R32 and R454B. Okay, and you can see their global warming potentials are right here, 675 and 466 respectively. So, somebody asked me a few presentations ago, like, why don't we just make it 500 or 466 since 454B is below that? And that's because a lot of manufacturers are already using R32 and there's a big manufacturer that actually makes R32, and R32 and 454B are not new to the industry. They're just kind of new to the US. We're kind of behind in terms of this. So if you're a manufacturer, you have two refrigerants to choose from. Which one do you choose? So, you go through and you look at the properties of the manufacturing. You take into the consideration who makes these refrigerants, which is important if you're a manufacturer. And we'll just go through this chart here. So the refrigerant itself, 410A, 454B, R32. So we're going to focus on the ASHRAE 34 classification near the end of this. So I'm not going to talk about that too much, other than you'll see these are now what's called A2L. So we're going to touch on that in a minute.
Yeah. And I see some questions on the side, in regards to what refrigerant's better, what refrigerant we prefer. My stance on that is always, I don't try to push refrigerants. I don't really think anyone should be at this point, because there are going to be different refrigerants used for different solutions. And I don't necessarily think that the design community should lock themselves into specific equipment due to those refrigerants. When we look at the efficiency differences, when we look at things like that, if we're just kind of considering the equipment efficiencies, things like that, I think that, locking yourself into a specific refrigerant so early into this transition, may not be, the best way to go. I think that, everyone kind of should be open to, we have these regulations to make sure that we can slowly, change the industry. So, that's kind of my view on that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. We have manufacturers, excuse me, that use both refrigerants, and they're both safe. They're both very, someone mentioned something about major gains with 32. I have not seen that from any of the manufacturers who've done extensive testing on it. But anyway, do your homework, do your research. And my opinion is, if somebody's pushing one refrigerant over the other, that's all they got is the one refrigerant. That's been my experience as a rep for 25 years. So I caution mechanical engineers just to be wary of the motives there. So, okay. So GOP, we talked about that, GWP, excuse me. You can see we're below the 700 threshold. So component mix ratios, not all refrigerants are a pure refrigerant. Okay, so our R410A was actually a blend of 32 and 125, which is like a fire suppressant, is what I understand, in a 50-50 ratio. 454B is a blend of 32 and 1234YF, which is actually what we find in automobiles. So that's a A2L refrigerant as well. And then R32 is just R32. Okay. When you look at the operating pressures, they're all pretty similar. I'm not sure a manufacturer would look at one or the other. It is the 454B is closer to the 410A, so maybe you might take that in consideration, because if it's similar in pressure, then you don't have to worry about a lot of the things, changing the components, et cetera. So a few notes here on the bottom. The discharge temperatures of 32 is higher than 410A. So just be careful of that. If you've reached in a machine before and hit a discharge pipe with your arm, you know they can get pretty hot. So they're even going to be hotter. So be a little wary of that. Again, efficiency and capacity from the major manufacturers I've talked to, there's really there's not enough difference there to sway you one way or the other. Sometimes there is, if you're, a centrifugal chiller guy and you got two options and you could pick up 1 or 2% off the refrigerant, you're going to go with that refrigerant. But in these cases, we haven't seen any significant changes there. So oil. So refrigerant systems do have oil in them. Okay, it's good. Keeps things lubricated and keeps the friction down. That oil does get out in the system sometimes, but we try to keep it mostly in the compressor. So R32 has a POE oil of 46. It's heavier because it runs a little bit hotter. 410A and 450B have 410A and 454B have the same POE of 32 oil. So if you're a tech, you got to carry some more. You may already have 46 on there. I don't know.
Yeah. That's going to be a thing to definitely make sure that people keep track of, right? Because everyone's been working on 410A machines, so they're going to have that PO 32 oil. So you're going to have to make sure to get 46 on those trucks.
Yep. All right, let's see if we can pick a few of these questions. What are the GWPs of the new set of refrigerants? Okay, we talked about that. A furnace needs sensors to detect. Oh, this is a great question. If Joe, if that's okay, I'll answer that later on in the presentation. I talk about that, but sensors, yes, they're going to need them. 600 is there? I've heard a talk of. So we get this all the time too. Like Chris is asking a good question. When we go back to this slide here, is the next phase out of R32, like, is the EPA going to come out and say it's now 600, so you can't use R32? I have no clue. I have no idea. I know theoretically that the EPA would like to have it at zero. If they had their way, they would have it at zero. We just can't. As manufacturers and manufacturers rep, we don't have an option for zero right now. Otherwise, it would be zero.
Yeah, and it's also, good to mention that we are tied to a lot of other industries. Commercial HVAC is not the only industry that's affected by this. So there are a lot of considerations just outside of the HVAC.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I keep the tunnel vision thinking we're the only ones that use this refrigerant. But, another thing to consider is, these decisions are not like, no one's asking the manufacturers that much about, these policies. I have a very good friend who goes to these meetings. A lot of these big HVAC companies have a liaison to the governmental affairs type position. And they'll go, he says, when he goes to the EPA or, Congress to meet with folks about refrigerants, it's him, 12 lawyers, and one new intern engineer, so it's like, we're not making the rules. We're kind of reacting to the rules. There's not, to me, my opinion is, this is just my Tony opinion, but there's not enough engineers being involved in these decisions who know about HVAC equipment. And like Kevin said, we're not the only industry that uses these either. So, we talked about this a little bit. What are manufacturers going with, which is best? So that most of them with the packaged units or VRF systems or the air-cooled chillers are going with 32 or 454B. They're both great refrigerants to me. Most people I talk to are very comfortable with both of them. They've both been around a long time. Again, just be wary of motives if someone's selling one against another. Okay, so Joe is asking about, we'll have this on. We will have this on our YouTube channel afterwards. We'll post that at the end. We'll give you some information on how to watch this later or share it. Hey, Craig Allen. He says, any idea the cost difference to 450? So there's pros and cons to this, as we talked about. The cost difference is a little higher, I believe, on 454B just because it's a blend. It's very negligible, but that's what I understand. So let's see, where are we at? Okay.
A key parameter.
A key parameter. There's that key parameter guy again, Kevin. We'll get to that video in a minute.
Our guy.
All right, so we got to include some questions because this is a requirement from the PDH thing. So if anyone wants to answer this in chat, great. We'll see. The first person to answer it gets a shout out. How about that? So the AIM Act limits refrigerant GWP to what value? So that's a pretty easy one. So we'll let people chew on that for a minute. Do any manufacturers currently Yeah. The answer to that's yes. We're not going to really name manufacturers here because this is a PDH deal, but there are many manufacturers that currently use 32. So,
yep.
And again, these refrigerants are not new. They're just kind of new to the U.S. Oh, Joshua got 700, and so did Juan and Valmiki. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. Man, we got a lot of good answers. You guys are actually paying attention. Oh my gosh, this is great. We're not boring everybody to tears. Okay, so we talked about deadlines in equipment shipments. We talked about remnant inventory. What else do we talk about? Manufacturing the refrigerant, deadlines and phase downs. Now we're going to talk about the A2L-ness of the refrigerant. I call it the A2L-ness, but the classification of the refrigerant here, which is really the biggest part of the difference is, when we went to 22, there was a big change in pressure. That was a big deal. Now where pressures are kind of the same, but we're having a change in the classification. So ASHRAE 34 is the designation and safety classification of refrigerants in terms of flammability and toxicity. So in ASHRAE 34, they have different assignments for every refrigerant. So they're rated in different ways, okay? So you'll see this chart here. I'm going to go back to my pen tool. And on the on the y-axis, we have flammability increasing as you go up. And from left to right, we have toxicity. So we have lower toxicity, higher toxicity, and I'll start on that first. So an A means lower toxicity. B means higher toxicity. So higher toxicity might be ammonia or something like that. 410A is right here. Okay. So these numbers, the 1, the 2L, the 2, and the 3 have to do with the flammability of the refrigerant. Okay. So if it's 3, it's highly flammable, i.e. propane. If it's no flame propagation, that's the correct term. It's A1. So that's 410A. A2 is flammable, and A2L is something that's relatively new, which was created because of these refrigerants are kind of like, they're not an A1 and they're not an A2. They're kind of somewhere in between, and we'll look at that. So how do you determine the flammability of the refrigerant? So what you do is you take a glass beaker like the one here, and you put in some of the refrigerant, you put a stopper on it, you put some air in there, you mix it up real good, and then you hit it with a large charge. And do you see these dotted lines on the corner here, on the side here? If it stays within that value, then it's an A1 refrigerant, okay? Got so many things going on here. I can't remember what button to push. I hope I don't push the button that kills the whole presentation. Then no one will get their PDH credits. So I'm going to try to not do that. So if you look at this V here, when you put the refrigerant in there, and there's no oil in these refrigerants in all 3 of these examples I'm going to show you, and there's no, if it doesn't go beyond that 90 degree, then it's classified as an A1. It's just that simple. Okay, see how it's, see how it's within there, barely within there, but it's in there. So think about an A2L refrigerant. You're hearing it's flammable. Oh my gosh, it's going to light the building on fire. What do you think that flame propagation would look like? Right? Like in my mind, I have a vision of what I think it would look like, but in reality, it looks like that. Okay. So it's only coming over that teeny tiny amount of flame propagation causes it. We can't call it an A1. It's not quite an A2, so that's where the A2L kind of came up with. Makes sense?
I love these graphics. I think, we've seen the tables of the definitions of everything, but to actually see the method in which it's tested and see, the difference between the two, I think is impactful.
Yeah. When I first saw this, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now I tell you, I do a lot in this to show the reality of the flammability of it, but it still is extremely important in terms of codes and like not using this as a drop in and making sure you've got all that taken care of. And it does have low flammability. So there is something to that, but I just I'm trying to disseminate the fear of it's like propane. Okay. Which is what I thought. So the next slide shows you propane. So that's an A3 refrigerant. Okay. So you can see there's just a humongous difference between an A2L and an A3. And when I heard flammable, that's what I saw in my head, like an A3.
Yeah, it's like an Oppenheimer slide.
It does look like that. So when you compare them all together, it looks something like that. So
yeah. And something that I like to point out with this transition too is, something like propane. A lot of us are comfortable with propane, right? We use it for our grills, things like natural gas, so at the end of the day, while a transition like this and, lower flammability can be intimidating, as long as we're following local codes, regulations, they're in place to keep everyone safe. So, it's just the same that everyone does with natural gas. They follow the codes and regulations, and that keeps everyone safe.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said, Kevin.
Thank you.
Good job. Okay. By the way, Kevin's first live show. So if you like what he's doing, give him a thumbs up. I'm sure he would appreciate that. We all like likes on our social media, so go ahead and like this presentation if you want. Okay, Alexander asked this question, and I don't have this. Do you have one for A2? No, every time I do this, I'm like, ooh, I need to get an A2 slide because I'm curious what that looks like. So I'll try and find that and share that when I can. So that could be my next social media post. Let's see here. So. All right, now we're getting to the video. Okay, so now I'm going to play this video. I'm going to caution that when we live stream, the audio is about 50-50 whether it comes through or not. It's such a really good video to show certain aspects of the A2L that we're going to talk about in a minute. So I'm going to play this. If you can't hear the audio, let me know in the chat and I'll just explain it. So,
a key parameter in determining the actual risk of a gas to ignite is the mixture reaching its flammability limits in air. The lower flammability limit is important as you need to have enough gas mixed with air in order for it to reach its flammable concentrations to ignite and burn. So if during a leak situation, the leak rate and the quantity released is large enough that it surpasses the lower flammability limit, flammable concentrations can form. Propane is a commonly used low GWP refrigerant in small refrigerated cabinets, but its lower flammability limit is only 2% propane by volume in air. This means that for even small charge sizes, flammable layers can form and actually ignite and burn. You typically need 4 times more A2Ls to reach flammable concentrations as compared to A3s such as propane. Hence, A2Ls are inherently safer as you're less likely to form flammable concentrations. This means much higher quantities of low GWP A2L refrigerants are necessary just to be flammable, which means there are a number of leak scenarios for these A2Ls that would not even result in any consequential flammable volumes. Another key parameter in determining whether a mixture actually ignites or doesn't ignite is the minimum ignition energy, or the MIE. The minimum ignition energy is important as most electrical components actually can produce electrical sparks under normal operation, unless they're specifically designed to actually avoid that. If the energy of the spark or the electrical discharge is higher than the minimum ignition energy, then in a specific leak scenario, you can actually ignite the mixture if flammable concentrations are reached. Propane has a minimum ignition energy of just 0.25 millijoules, which means that even a weak discharge, static discharge, say from your clothing, can actually exceed this value and potentially cause an ignition event. To give you an idea of what millijoules are, so say for example in the wintertime, I'm actually shuffling my feet on the carpet and I actually touch a door handle and I actually shock myself, That value is actually 20 millijoules, or almost 100 times higher than the energy necessary to ignite propane. In comparison, A2L refrigerants have minimum ignition values 2,000 times higher than that of propane, meaning much higher energy sources are required in order to obtain ignition. This also means that many commonly used electronic components can be used safely with Opteon XL refrigerants. The severity of an accidental ignition can be determined by many factors, such as reactivity, for example, how fast the flame burns, or burning velocity, as well as combustion energy. The higher the gas's reactivity and combustion energy, the larger the potential impact the accident can have on the surrounding area. To put that into perspective, the combustion energy of Opteon XL20 is approximately 5 times lower than that of propane. In addition, it's significantly less reactive than propane, where its burning velocity is actually 30 times slower.
All right, so I like that video because it goes through the basic. For me, if I can't see it, it's hard for me to understand it. So what I take from that is the concentration has to be really high. You have to have a very high ignition source, and then burning velocity is very low. So the lower flammability limit, LFL, you'll hear about that like it's mentioned in the ASHRAE 15 guide, and that's what they're talking about there. Minimum ignition energy, it's 2,000 times more than propane. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Also, make sure that everyone out there, don't store your tasers near your HVAC equipment. Put those in a drawer somewhere.
Yeah, don't tase before you tase somebody. Make sure there's not A2Ls in the higher concentration over the lower flammability limit. Hold on, let me test the concentration here of the A2Ls. But yeah, so this next video is another example, and this is more my speed. This is like my kind of example here.
Open our blowtorch tap. We've got nice flow of refrigerant coming out of the end of the torch. And I've just got a common flint ignition source commonly found in all workshops. And you can't see really any flame propagating there at all.
So that's flame. The A2L there.
If I increase the velocity, I've still got nothing. So as you can see, the class A2L will not ignite at all. Now the second stage of our demonstration is the HC refrigerant, class A3. So we will open the liquid valve, open our blowtorch tap, our ignition source, and as you can see, it ignites immediately.
So no big shocker there. Yeah. Okay, there's just a few examples. Again, not to take away the seriousness of the codes, your local codes, the drop-in scenario, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Don't do that. So anyway, just a little bit there. Okay, if you're a consulting engineer and you have someone who's scared of A2Ls and is using that to sway their decision, you could ask them, how old's your car? Because most likely they have A2L refrigerant in there, the 1234YF. I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's just 1234YF. I don't know. But anyway, so if you've got a car within the last probably 5 to 10 years, it's got A2L refrigerants in there already. And it's got gasoline in it, which is a little more flammable than A2Ls. So, yeah. Okay, question number 2. You cannot ship commercial HVAC equipment, excluding VRF, with R410A after what date? So what's the deadline? I think we could word that. I'm going to word that a little better next time. But basically, the deadline for R410A and equipment shipments, excluding VRF. So I'll let people answer that while we move on to the next couple slides here. I'm going to save that one for later if we have enough time because we're running a little long here. But anyway, so this slide is to show a general manufacturer, and this is just representative of a conversation we want to have. Like we get this all the time. I see a lot of correct answers there. Great. 125. That's great. So if I'm designing a job, should I design it on the new refrigerants or on 410A? Kevin, what do you tell a consultant engineer? Calls you, Kevin, I want a rooftop unit selection. Should I get 410A or should I design it around one of these other machines that aren't shipping quite yet? What do you think?
Yeah, I think right now a critical communication point is going to be project timeline. When is the equipment being installed? When is the equipment needed, right? Because we're sitting here first week of June. We're about 24, 26 weeks from the end of the year. Lead times on some equipment is out there already. So this is something that we should be considering now, for certain pieces of equipment. But again, having an idea of when your project line is going to actually happen, probably adding buffer because we know construction, and just really, that will be the way to start steering designs towards these new refrigerants as time goes on.
I love it. Now, that's a good assessment from the standpoint of timeline. What advice would you give someone who said, I can get a 410A piece of gear right now, or I could wait and get the 32, right? Like, should I replace my unit now with a 410A, or should I patch it up, wait for the 32? What do you think about that scenario?
I think that just really depends on how critical your process is, how desperate you are for air conditioning, right? Because I think if you need something right now today, I wouldn't delay your need to try to avoid a 410 refrigerant. It's going to be there. It's not going to be something that you're going to look 2 years from now and be like, oh man, I have to install my equipment again. So I wouldn't hold out, if you need something for the newer, equipment, but on those timelines that are going to be in the future, I would start having that conversation now, because as we know, the design process can take time, before things come out to bid, everything like that. So, you should certainly be talking to your local representatives and local manufacturers about this.
Excellent. I totally agree with that wholeheartedly. So, all right. So the end of this, we're at the end here. We're in the home stretch, and thank you again for listening, by the way, and watching. Again, this is our first New York and New Jersey approved one. Thank you to Klima New York and Klima New Jersey, EBS, ETS for helping with this. We got a couple more slides here. We're going to talk about the ASHRAE 34 and then the UL rating, and then the sensors, like what are people doing for sensors in the equipment? That's something that's just starting to come out. So we're going to talk about that. And then we do have 3 more PDH approved presentations. We're going to be starting psychrometrics. So psychrometrics, I think it's 1, 2, and 3 we've got approved with New York and New Jersey, which means it's approved almost everywhere if it's approved in New York, New Jersey. So please stay tuned for those. So a little bit of a commercial break there. Okay, so what's not changing? Let's talk about, as the equipment hits the field, what's changing and what's not changing. So what's not changing? Safety and PPE, like if you're going on a job site, none of that changes for technicians or sales guys or what have you. So that's going to all stay the same. Charging an A2L system is the same process as charging a non-A2L system. Just use best practices. Service vehicles, business as usual. There's no special transportation. It's similar to how you would transfer refrigerants today, whether it's an A2L or an A1. So there's no special placards or anything like that. As far as I know, to the date of this pre-show, there's none, but please check on that as we continue to go through this. So another quick question here. According to ASHRAE 34 classification, R32 and 454B are considered highly flammable. True or false? We'll let some folks add that. Okay, this is a big deal. A2L refrigerants will only be used in new equipment. They are not being used in existing A1 systems. So we've gotten this question a bunch of times, right? I got an old 410A unit. Can I just take that 410A out, put an A2L refrigerant? The answer is no. Well, the answer is you can do that. Will it work? I don't know. False is the answer. Thank you, everybody. Will it work? I don't know. The biggest thing is you're going to be violating the UL rating of the unit. You're going to be violating building codes, EPA restrictions. So be super careful with that. Make sure everybody's trained. Definitely don't do it on purpose, because you could lose your license. You could lose your business. It's a very big deal. The equipment is not designed for that refrigerant. So be super, super careful of that. Any comments on that, Kevin?
I know. I agree. I think it's going to be very important to just, and just pay attention to what you were using. And, at the end of the day, like we've said throughout this, even though we are looking at the, difficulty to ignite, we're looking at the flame propagation, that doesn't mean that you go, it's good enough. And I'm talking to everyone in the Northeast when I say that, my New Jersey and New York people, it's something that we are going to have to avoid as this transition happens.
Yeah, for sure. So Some things that are changing, some of the tech's equipment, vacuum pumps, gauges, other things are changing. So make sure if you're going to update your gear, make sure when you update it to an A2L rated piece of service equipment. Tanks are changing. So in general, we used to have a different color for each refrigerant. They're all going towards gray tanks. So if you like the color gray and you're a service tech, you're in luck. All your tanks are going to be gray. If you see a red band on the gray tank, that means it's an A2L. So it's an easy way to tell if it's an A2L refrigerant. And part of the reason they're doing this is because they want people to know, hey, be very careful. Also, the threads on the tank are reversed. Okay, so you need an adapter. You can see there's that little copper piece above the tanks. That's an adapter. Okay, so if you try to hook up your regular gauges to an A2L tank, you won't be able to do that. And again, that's to prevent someone from going out on site who may not be trained and do this every day and out there doing this and make an accident that can cost can be a big problem. So that's the reason for the adapters. So make sure if it was me and I was a tech, I'd have like 15 of those adapters because I would lose them left and right. But you got to be careful of that.
Yeah, I also believe that the location of that red marking delineates between recovery and fresh A2L refrigerant as well.
That's right. Thank you for mentioning that. And you also spurred, I forgot to mention about the disc, but yeah, the one on the right is a recovery tank. It's a refillable tank. So the other thing that's changing, and thank you, Kevin, is so current tanks have a rupture disc. A rupture disc works like this. There's a lot of pressure, it ruptures, and everything comes out of the tank. These tanks have what's called a relief valve, which is more of a burping type mechanism. So if the pressure gets high, it relieves the pressure, but then it closes back down when the pressure gets safe. That's because they don't want the whole van or service technician's car or mechanical room to be filled with an A2L. So that's the other deal there. As far as federal transportation goes, I won't get into a lot of details here. They are not going to be required to be hazmat. I don't think the final rule is out on this yet, but the FDOT, I think it's the FDOT, has released special permits. So there are SP 21287 and 21379. Basically, it's varying the requirements of placards and some kind of paperwork, but it's not going to be anything where it's going to require hazmat shipping. If you know anything about hazmat shipping, it's a huge pain. That's a big deal. So it's not going to require that. More to follow on that. Okay, some valuable resources from you. This is from ASHRAE. You can, if Courtney, if you want to share the link to this is an interactive map where you can go in there and actually click on the state. Here's an example of that, and it will pull up the building code. So all the building codes have to be updated for A2Ls. I'm pretty sure most building codes in the U.S. have been updated, but you can check here, and it's got a go-to resource. It's a really valuable resource that we'll share the link to. So you can go to that and check that out at any time.
Yeah. And I recommend always checking that. Things are updating. This is a living, breathing transition that we're moving through. So just because it reads one way one day, it may change in a couple months. So just make sure that you're checking that regularly.
Good advice. Absolutely. The other piece of information here, which I have found very valuable, and I know people are asking the question, is A2L cylinder storage options. So this is another PDF. This is by ASHRAE, and you can go and download this, save it. I won't go through it because I'm not an expert on it at all. But if you have a warehouse, you're going to be storing this refrigerant, this is a good resource as well. Good question, Gilbert. Yeah, and I'm going to get through these last couple slides, and then I'll go through these questions and see if we can be of help to some people there. So that's another great resource. So go check that out. Okay, so real quick on the codes and standards. So the two codes and standards we typically deal with. We already talked about ASHRAE 34, so I won't talk about that. ASHRAE 15 is the safety standard for refrigeration systems. This has to do with the installation of the equipment. And UL 60335-2-40 is the UL rating we use for HVAC equipment in terms of, it has to do with the fire and electrical and stuff like that. So that's the code and the standards we have to deal with. So ASHRAE 15 is commercial, 15.2 is residential. So right now the current ASHRAE 34 and ASHRAE 15, you could purchase those on ASHRAE's website in the bookstore as a combo. I think there's a deal if you buy them both together. They're the 2022 versions with addendums, but I understand they're coming out with a new version at the end of this year. So I would, if it were me, I would wait. You can see the read-only standard 15 on, if you're a member, you can get in there and see the read-only version, and you could download all the addendums. There's been like over 20 of them. So I went and downloaded a few and just to check it out. So you can go do that anytime on their website. And then 34 is going to be updated as well. So is my understanding. UL rating, again, this is the UL rating. It's a safety standards that outlines various safety requirements, including protection against electrical shock, fire hazard, and mechanical hazards. So this has been the big question up until now, and we're just starting to see what manufacturers are doing. So the two manufacturers that I have received information from are basically doing something like this. There's a sensor, and then there's a control board to handle the mitigation if a leak occurs. So the EPA is requiring a sensor if it senses a lower flame, a concentration 25% of the lower flammability limit. Okay, 25%, which is way below the LFL. You have to go in some kind of mitigation mode. What that looks like is the control board turns off all unnecessary compressors, heaters, etc., anything that's not needed to run the fan, and it ramps the fan up. Okay, the principle behind it sounds counterintuitive, like, why are you blowing all this stuff into my space? But what's the point of that is to try to get the dilution down. Okay, the dilution of the refrigerant. These products are, they will just be OEM only. They have to be installed. They have to be made from the manufacturer and installed where the manufacturer tells you to install them. Most of them, are going to come from the factory. They'll also be self-testing. If they fail, there'll be an alarm. It'll shut down the equipment, which is, another layer of complexity of the equipment. But that's what we got to work with today. So RDS, refrigerant detection systems. When you hear that, that's kind of what they're talking about: a sensor in a control board.
Yeah, and earlier someone had asked about specifically in regards to that in VRF, and that is something that we're seeing inside of the indoor units.
Oh, yeah.
To be integrated into the system to shut off refrigerant flow. And as Tony said, ramp up the fans. Everyone's going to handle that sort of mitigation differently from the feedback they get from the sensors of, what they're shutting down, where those valves are. Are they in your, in your heat recovery box? Are they at the inlet of the unit? But they will all have some sort of mitigation, sequence.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the VRF. Someone did ask that. And I understand there's going to be maybe the room sensor itself will have a sensor in it. There'll be something at the indoor unit, and then there'll be something at the branch boxes, is what I understand from the manufacturers. I haven't seen anything in writing on that. There may be something out there, but I have not seen it. But,
and there was another question about the weight and how it displaces oxygen. These A2L refrigerants are heavier than oxygen, so they are going to, drop and displace. So, it will also be interesting to see, how we're going to have to handle where those sensors are, as time goes on.
Yeah, for sure. There's one more question about the sensors from Ryan. Thank you. And thank you all for the questions. We love this. We hope we can answer as many as we can. But Gilbert asked the question about A2L causes oxygen displacement. Yes. Ryan says, do you know where the sensor needs to be located in the unit or low in the room, requiring additional wiring? And I don't know the answer to that. I know the units do require something, as we just talked about. Where they put it, it depends on their testing. They're responsible to test to make sure they can read the proper concentration. This manufacturer, which I'm not going to mention, actually has their sensor in the return of the unit. That's where they found to be the best place to determine the concentration. So one of the other manufacturers has it in the supply of the unit. So they were going to be responsible for that. As far as, the space, that's an ASHRAE 15 thing. So that I'm still looking for an expert on that to come in and kind of give us some updates so we can share that information. So I don't know the answer to that. So I'm going to finish up with one last question. Then I'll tell everybody how to get their certificate. Then I'll go in and see if we can answer some more questions. So last question: 454B and R32 can be used as a drop-in refrigerant to 410A, true or false? Okay. I'll let folks answer that. So before I go and answer all the rest of the questions, to get your PD8 certificate, again, if you, Heather, will you mind putting the email address up real quick? So if you registered on LinkedIn, we have your email. Again, we're going to email everybody their certificate, but those go to spam often. So just email me to be safe. There's my email address. We'll leave that up here for a bit while we answer the questions. So if you need a certificate, email me and we'll get that back to you. And again, please stay tuned. We're going to stay on here for a minute and go through these questions, but you've met the 50-minute requirement for the PDH credit. please stick around. We're not trying to kick you out of here, but if you got to go grab some lunch or do whatever, go for it. And then just email me. And we're going to stick around and do this. And please, before you leave, please like and share this post. We appreciate it. So, Kevin, did we miss any questions here? I don't know.
Well, everyone got your last question. It seems, right? We have a lot of falses coming in, so everyone good on that.
Good. Do A2L refrigerant lines need to be in a fire-rated shaft? I don't know the answer to that. Do you know, Kevin?
My understanding is that they do, and also my understanding is there has to be some sort of exhaust in that shaft. I believe that just came out recently. Yeah.
Gotcha. Does the RDS allow for exceeding RCO just requirement for ATL system? I don't know what that is, so I don't know how to answer that. Sorry. If the pressure is similar to the 14 refrigerant, let's see here. If the pressures
that's a good question. Yeah.
Go take that one, Kevin.
Okay, yeah. The question from Chris is, if the pressures are similar, is there a possibility that the refrigerant piping from a 410A system can be reused for a new A2L system? The answer to that is going to be, in VRF systems, it's always important to coordinate your pipe length. So if with this new equipment, there's a possibility that pipe sizes may change depending on your refrigerant piping runs, but it will be, kind of a coin flip whether or not those sizes will change. If you work with the manufacturer and the sizes don't change, then the pressure ratings of the refrigerant piping will be okay. There will obviously, there will most likely be some sort of methods that we will have to use to make sure that refrigerant piping is cleaned. But, if the sizes are the same per the as-built, piping diagrams that you'll get from a VRF manufacturer, you should be okay to use that existing piping.
Great question. Yeah, that's not an inexpensive thing to change out the piping for a VRF system. So,
yeah,
good deal, man. I think we got it all here. I think we got all the questions. So, Kevin, what do you think? You want to do this again?
Yeah, this was great. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed you having me. I appreciate very much everyone's participation in the question section, as you and I were talking about when we're just sitting here talking to a screen or a camera. It's nice feeling that people are here with us. So I appreciate everyone that chimed in.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you all so much for watching. Check out our YouTube channel at HVAC TV. There's a couple of things there. You can QR code, click on the link. I'm going to play this out. I've got a 3-minute timer here. We'll show this for a minute, but thank you so much. Please join us for the next one. Stay tuned and we'll be back at you soon. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah. Thank you all.